I'd like to introduce Brother Mike Beatty, who's going to share with us some eternal perspective, after which I'll have a few comments to close. Thank you, Brother Beatty.
May I begin by, the way I always begin is letting you know that I have a sensitivity of such that I cry at the dedication of supermarkets. And so today is going to be a very difficult day for me. The other observation I have is, I'm like many of you probably wondering why Brother Ralph would ask me to speak. I see many in front of me and many behind me that are certainly more qualified. Like many of you, like all of you, Ralph was a great friend. When you ask Ralph, how are you doing, he'd always answer in two ways. He'd say, I'm happy, and he'd have a smile on his face. And the other thing he'd say is, well, I'm looking forward to meeting my wife again. And it was always the same thing. And you know, when you heard the second one at first, you said, "Wow, that's very interesting." And then you realized just what a great man he is. Over the years, I spent a lot of time with Ralph. I actually did on my calculator some calculations and realized I've spent hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours with him. And so I thought I would share some of those experiences with him. One place where I'd always try to be with him is in priesthood opening exercises. Most of the time he was in this building, and we'd go back in the back building, and he'd be in the seat, and I'd try to grab the seat next to him. It was a very always enjoyable thing. We'd share some pleasantries and things, and we'd maybe have a bit of a conversation, and we'd follow each other to our priesthood meeting, many of which I was his group leader for many years, 6 years or so, and then in leadership also for a long time. And so I had the opportunity to see him kind of in a different way. And one way was really interesting was this. Is the beginning of priesthood meetings, you'd always have assignments to be made that the stake may have given you, or you have to get people to do something, clean the building, the temple, just various type of assignments we have. And so often I would ask for volunteers. And at the end of those meetings, when I did that, Ralph would do this. Now, here's the look. Now, if you know Ralph, you know this look. He kind of furrowed his brow a little bit. He kind of tilted his head down and looked at you, and he had those piercing eyes, and he looked at you very seriously. And he said, Brother Mike, I don't think you should be asking for volunteers. You should be doing it by assignment. And we'd have that discussion. We had this week after week after week. And I would say, well, I don't know how everybody's scheduling that. So the next week I would say, I want to make an assignment. And Brother Ralph's hand would go up right away. And at the end of it, I said, Brother Ralph, you said that I was supposed to not ask for volunteers, and you were volunteering. And that's just the way he was. He was always there. He was always volunteering. And he always had that great sense of humor about him and just presence. Spent many times in these volunteer activities is going to the Bishop's Storehouse. And I would guess that we probably spent 10 or 12 trips that whenever he would volunteer, he'd ask me to drive him. And that was really one of the greatest times of my life. We'd spend an hour driving down and an hour driving back, and we'd have deep gospel discussions. The other night in my house, Brandon Hatton was there, and we were talking, and like everybody, universally, that when we talk about Brother Ralph, they would say, if anybody's ready to meet Heavenly Father, it's him, and that's true. But Brandon shared a story about, we were talking about the Bishop's Storehouse, that said, you know, one day I was going to the Bishop's Storehouse with Brother Smith, and on the way back, he was talking, he said, I've been talking to Heavenly Father a lot the last couple of weeks, and been asking him that it's time for me to go and be with my wife again. And he was going on and on and on about this, and Brandon, who also had lost his wife, sat there for a while and said, you know, Brother Smith, you know, I think I'd like to see my wife again soon too. In the back of the car, I'm not sure who it was, but I think it's Brother Silverstein. He said, wait, keep your eyes on the road, you guys. We're not going anywhere but home. And they laughed about that and enjoyed that, but that was, that's Brother Smith. We had lots of opportunity to have lessons in class. And I asked him many times, would you mind teaching? And he always would say, well, my hearing isn't as good. I don't like being in front of people when I can't hear what their questions are going to be. And I said, okay. But he would sit in class, and then he would sit there and he'd raise his hand and he would teach just by his experience and give wisdom that was second to none. So you never had to ask him to teach a class. You just asked the question, and he would do it. And so that was always a great source of that all of us enjoyed. On occasion, I was glad you talked about ice cream because my wife and I took him out for ice cream a couple of times and went to one of these places that had like 30 different kinds of ice cream. They were soft serve kind of yogurt thing, and he would go and he'd get like 20 different flavors in this big cup. And then he goes, this doesn't taste as good as you think it would when it mixed together like that. And then he put all kinds of things. He loved his ice cream, and those were great, enjoyable times too. Oftentimes, and I would oftentimes get in trouble for this at home, but we would sit after the priesthood meeting and just sit and talk about various things, about his family. I know more about his kids and grandkids than many of you may think I know. And shared experiences, and those are great times. As a patriarch, he gave blessings to some of my children, and he sealed in the temple others as a sealer. I try to remember which ones it was. I'm old also, and one of them was my daughter Allison and her husband, and so texted this message. I wanted to read this to you. Yes, he married us. He and Ruth taught them in the temple prep class. And this is what she said. Sorry. I will never forget how in love they were. Everybody knew how in love they were. Teaching a temple prep class to young children, if you will, young adults, and exuding that type of spirit and feeling. It just, and that's Ralph. That's who he was, and that's why we love him. I think I know why he was so happy. We've heard some today, but he loves his wife and his family, and that was a great asset to him. But I think, as much as anything, his sure knowledge of the restoration of the gospel, that Jesus does live, were a great source of that happiness. He's a great man. I would describe him always as kind and courteous. His very presence changed people just by knowing him, just by seeing him. He influenced hundreds, perhaps thousands, of lives as a bishop, as a friend, an acquaintance, a patriarch, a sealer, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, and a father, and a husband. He's one of those rare people, by just knowing him, made us better. And I can say that I'm a better person because of him. I want to share a story today. And in my last meeting with Ralph, we talked about this many times, this particular story, and there was an update to it. And so in my last meeting with him, I shared it with him, and we shared some tears over it at the same time. A little over 30 years ago, a man named Dave was assigned as a duty in the Coast Guard. Now, those of you who don't know it, I spent 25 years in the Coast Guard. But he had a 4-year assignment as an instructor in an electronics school. At the end of his assignment, the very last 2 weeks of his assignment, he was preparing to go and move his family and across the country. And a new class moved in to that 4-month school at that time. And there was a young man there in that class named Rick. And Rick got to know Dave a very short period of time, just literally a matter of hours. But in that matter of hours, Dave invited him to church. Rick wasn't able to go. The following week, when Rick made arrangements, was able to go, Dave had been transferred. And so they never got to see each other again. Rick completed his school and he was transferred and went to Mobile, Alabama. And while at Mobile, Alabama, there for a couple months, he remembered Dave and what his presence and influence had on him. And he decided, I'm going to find the church and try to go to it. So he looked up in the phone book. Now, a phone book is a large book, a document that has addresses and phone numbers in it. There were no phones, there were no cell phones, no smartphones, no computers, any of that back then. This was back in 1984. And then he got a map. And a map is a thing that folds out and has streets on it. And so he took that phone book, found the address, followed the map, and came to the church building and walked inside into the foyer, very much like this foyer. The meeting was going on inside, a sacrament meeting was going on, and so he sat on the couch outside that meeting. I was serving as a bishop at the time, and my office was facing the foyer. That particular day, that particular hour, that particular time, the air conditioner in our office failed. It was a hot, humid, late morning in Mobile, and so after a bit of time, we cracked the door because the building was essentially air conditioned. So we opened the door, cracked the door a little bit, and so we could lessen the cool area. And as we did that, I noticed outside a young man sitting on the couch. His name was Rick. And the Spirit whispered to me, there's something special about this young man. Well, shortly after, he was a little bit of shy of going into a building he'd never been in before, or a church area, so he left. Shortly after that, our meetings concluded, and I went home to pick up my children, my wife, and come back to our sacrament meeting. And on that process, I saw him in his pickup car, his pickup truck driving away, and so I chased him down in mine, honked him down. The Spirit told me, teach this guy the gospel. And I don't think those are the exact words the Spirit whispered to me, but that was the effect. And so I honked the horn, pulled him off the road. And when I pulled him off the road, I saw he had a Coast Guard sticker, so I felt a bit of relief. And I said, I saw you in church there. And I thought I would see if he had any questions. I said, I'm the bishop here. And he did, and I invited him to our meeting, and I told him that I was going home to pick up my family, I'd meet him there, and we'd have him over for dinner that night. And that led to him taking the discussions from us and being baptized. Shortly after that, a couple months later, Rick got transferred to Seattle. While in Seattle, after a couple of years, he eventually left the Coast Guard and married there, had 4 children, married in a temple, had 4 children, and became a temple worker in the Seattle temple. Now, in his service there, he went in one day, and his supervisor told him, Rick, go to lunch. As he walked in the door in the very early morning, I think he was on an 8 to 2 shift, that he walked in, they said, go to lunch. He said, he kind of smiled and thought he was kidding. And he said, well, if you want me to go to lunch, I go to lunch. He goes to lunch. He's sitting there in the cafeteria, and he's having lunch. He sits with another brother that's with him, and they're talking, and the topic went to his conversion. And he said, over 30 years ago, there's this man that taught me by his example, and I wonder, is there any way I can find him or get contact with him? And he wasn't really positive of his name. And so they were saying, well, maybe call Salt Lake, and maybe you can find the stake or the ward and hunt him down that way. Well, the cafeteria started filling in with more people. And it did so, a brother came and said, hey, do you mind if I sit here? And he said, sure, please sit down. And he reached out his hand and said, hello, my name is Dave. The very same Dave that over 30 years ago, his example and his countenance, his presence changed Rick's life. Dave didn't remember Rick. It was directed by our Heavenly Father. Now, I tell you the story for a couple of reasons. First, to me, it's a very inspiring understanding of the gospel. And if you think of the things that preceded it, it was the fact that this young man saw another young man by the way he acted, and it changed, made him want to find out about it. An air conditioner broke down in my office. I was inspired to pull him off the road and teach him the gospel. He was sent to Seattle, and he went there, and very unusual, never happened before or since, his supervisor told him to go to the cafeteria and have his lunch. The second reason, and most importantly, is his influence reminds me of Ralph Smith. Ralph's probably perhaps the best man that I've ever known. He's influenced my life for the better, and he's influenced many others for the same thing. His countenance, his humility, his kindness, his generous nature has influenced and changed many lives. Many of those lives we may never know, and maybe Ralph doesn't remember. But I am confident that someday Ralph will reach out his hand to many and say, "Hello, my name is Ralph." And many will embrace him and wet his shoulders with their tears. I wanted to conclude with my testimony, and after that, I wanted to read a poem. And I feel that this might be something, this poem might reflect something. I may be so bold as to suggest that Ralph would want us to hear it. I know that the church is true. I know that God lives and that Jesus is the Christ. I know that the church is restored in these last days by the boy Joseph receiving a vision of Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ, and was given golden plates, and he translated those, and they became the Book of Mormon. I know that would be a true and another testament of Christ. I know this with a surety. I know that God does live. And my good friend and associate for so many years, Brother Ralph, does too. This is in a way very joyous because he is now has the opportunity to be with his eternal companion. There's a comforting thought at the close of the day. There's a comforting thought at the close of the day when I'm weary, lonely, and sad that sort of grips hold of this crusty old heart and bids it be merry and glad. It's in my soul, it drives out the blues and finally thrills through and through. It's just a sweet memory that chants the refrain. I'm glad I touched shoulders with you. Did you know you were brave? Did you know you were strong? Did you know there was one leaning hard? Did you know that I listened and waited and prayed and was cheered by your simplest word? Did you know that I longed for the smile on your face, for the sound of your voice ringing true? Did you know that I grew stronger and better because I merely touched shoulders with you? I'm glad that I live, that I battle and strive for the place I know I must fill. I'm thankful for sorrows. I'll meet them with a grin. What fortune may send, good or ill. I may not have wealth, I may not be great, but I know I will always be true. For I have in my heart the courage you gave when once I touched shoulders with you. In the name of Jesus Christ.